Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Insights Festival show. I am delighted to be stopping at our next region, which is Europe. And we have been very delighted to be bringing three fantastic researchers and research companies who are going to be telling us a little bit about the state of the art here in Europe, how are things are shaping up as a result of COVID-19, and how are we preparing for a post-COVID-19 world. These research companies have all contributed to a website called Research Eureka's for COVID-19, where over 150 research companies have contributed findings from around the world, telling us about how COVID-19 is impacting the world of today and how countries and regions around the world are anticipating a post-COVID-19 world. So I'm really delighted to be welcoming Edita, Francois, Mihailo from Europe to talk to us a little bit about how things are in Europe. All three of you, welcome to the show. It's great to have you guys here.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure being here.
So I'm going to allow each of our wonderful speakers to introduce themselves and to introduce the companies and the research that they've been undertaking. And ladies first, Edita, would you like to tell us where you're from and what the research that you've been undertaking is all about?
Yes, I'm from Kosovo. I work at a research company called Autocrawler, and it has another name, Pyper. So it operates in Kosovo market for like more than 2 years now. It's focused on market research, business needs, and so on. So our company's goal is to add value to businesses. Recently, we have conducted researches on voluntary basis in order to inform organizations and leaders regarding the situation in Kosovo, especially of those of startups and businesses. So that's it.
Thanks, Edita, and welcome to the show. Francois, you're up next, and tell us a little bit about the company that you're hailing from.
So I'm Francois. I'm in charge of research and development at Respondi. Respondi is a European panel provider. We have panel in France, Germany, and the UK. And actually, during lockdown, we decided to run a very big research among all of our panel members, and we asked them to explain in detail where did they spend lockdown, in which context, and so on, and what were the learnings. Actually, we did it just after the lockdown, and so we have conducted 25,000 interviews in our 3 countries because of this.
Thank you, Francois, and I'm really excited to learn more about the results and the findings. And last, but certainly not least, Mihailo, welcome to the show, welcome to the panel. And can you tell us a little bit about your company and where you're hailing from?
Hi, Kim. Thank you for the opportunity. We truly appreciate it. So my name is Mihailo Popescu. I'm head of research at Auspex International, which is a London-based global data-driven communications consultancy. I'm in charge of all primary research. In April this year, we have conducted 2 pieces of research, one in the UK and the other in Italy. And our focus was to understand how people psychologically and behaviorally responded to this crisis. The idea of actually having UK and Italy in the study was based on the fact that the UK was tracking 2 weeks behind Italy. So understanding how people emotionally and behaviorally responded to the crisis could help us to understand how people in the UK will respond in the future. Hence, we were thinking about building a strategy to help local government communicate with different audiences, because different people had different behavioral and emotional responses to this catastrophe that has befallen us.
Great. Well, thank you guys, and welcome to the show. I think we're going to have a lot of interesting things to learn about. So let's jump straight into it. I mean, you've conducted so clearly a lot of research with regards to COVID-19, with regards to the reaction of people, with regards to COVID-19 and the anticipation of the post-COVID-19 world, whatever that world might be. Can you tell us a little bit about what the research is exactly telling you from your research perspective, but also from your companies, in terms of how is Europe faring and what is the impact to Europe? Maybe Francois, you can get us started if that's possible.
Yes, of course. So actually, the impact of our main focus was, okay, lockdown has been kind of a collective trauma for European citizens. And as a collective trauma, it could have impact after the lockdown. So we actually, we identified, let's say, what is interesting actually is that it is a deeply unequal crisis. Of course, the poor people are far more impacted by the crisis than the wealthy ones. But between countries, we have more or less the same situation. So it means that we have more or less, we identified 6 typical reactions in each country, and more or less the share of each reaction is similar in each country. So lockdown has been a positive experiences for, let's say, 2 group of people: those who enjoyed extra time, who had time to do things that they usually didn't have time to do. It's very interesting because it's among single working women, and I guess if the new normal appears, it will be driven by single working women. This is our bet. And this is one of the main results of our research, to say we have a group of people which is mainly made of single working women, and who could drive the change in the future. Then we had another positive reaction was those who actually were fitted to the containment measures, typically family living in a rural environment. We had one mixed reaction, which is actually from old people who felt lonely during lockdown, but who actually were very happy to feel protected. And then we had 3 negative reactions. The people who felt overwhelmed by who had too much to deal with, people who felt imprisoned during lockdown, and people who are ideologically opposed to lockdown because it's a too oppressive measure, or it's a freedom destroying measure. So it's like the anti-mask movement that we can see now. So I would say from our research that the lockdown had a very huge impact among population. We can feel some changes typically on basic things like for instance, cooking behavior. We noticed a lot of changes in cooking behavior. It might have impact on this. For instance, if there is a change, it will be driven by women. I'm pretty sure about that. And I think that what we are seeing right now, so typically like BLM, like Black Lives Matter, this kind of movement right now has been fueled by the frustration experienced during lockdown.
Super interesting. So thank you so much for the beginnings. We have lots to unpick there. Mihailo, in terms of the research that's been conducted in kind of in the UK and Italy, are you finding those echoes as well in that research? Are you finding different kind of themes and topics which are emerging from your research?
Yeah, this is very interesting what Francois has said, and we also found evidence for what he actually brought up. So I quite agree with Francois. Europe is a small continent. There is so much more in common that the nations in Europe have than what brings us apart. I would say that this global pandemic that we experience in Europe has 4 vectors of action. There is a behavioral vector, there is a psychological vector, there is socio-political vector, and there is economic vector. In terms of behavioral vector, we've seen that people started increasingly practice hygiene, washing hands, they decrease social interaction. Obviously, this was all instrumented by the guidelines and recommendations from the government. And majority of people has assumed this constructive behavior to protect themselves and people around them. However, there is a minority of people that has this like spirit of defiance and ignoring and sense of impunity. So they were cynics. They typically said, I don't care about this virus. This is probably just a made up thing and, it can't harm me. So they ignore safety measures. They, for example, in the UK, started organizing illegal rave parties, and we've seen in the media that police had to intervene there. Some of them started refusing to wear masks, etc., etc. So we've seen that the minority of people, somewhere around 10%, assume this negative or destructive behavior. And the learning from this research is telling us that the government has to specifically target those people in communication to really nudge them to behave in a desired and constructive way. Also, we've seen a massive changes in the way how people consume. I absolutely agree with Francois that leisure spending has decreased, and we've seen that this decrease was in particular prominent among people who are well off, people who have surplus of cash. So the wealthiest people are saving the most at the moment. Those who are working hand to mouth, they really struggle right now, and I feel for them so much. When it comes to psychological vector, we've seen a growing sense of anxiety, growing sense of panic, sense of chaos, fear and stress. And in particular, this was prominent in Italy, where we've seen that fewer people have some savings to go through in this crisis. So obviously, when you are when you don't have any backup for a rainy day, this anxiety is actually emphasized. When it comes to socio-political dimension, we've seen, and I again agree with Francois, that this anxiety brought up by pandemic is actually fueling and triggering certain social unrest. We've seen massive protests across Europe, in Germany, in Spain, in Belarus, in Serbia, yesterday in Bulgaria, if you've seen the footages, like clashes with police. We believe that this pandemic is actually triggering people to go out on the street and voice their dissatisfaction with the situation. And finally, in socio-political domain, which is very surprising, we've seen a sentimental shift, for example, in Italy, where people now say, where 80 to 85% of people now say, we feel closer to Russia and China in this crisis because, hey, they've sent a couple of lorries with masks and respirators and all these necessities that we need. And that was a point of salience. And people forget what, for example, European Union was doing systematically for a couple of decades because European Union was doing this in a more discreet way, where you had new players such as Russia and China doing something that is very salient, sending the tracks with their flags. So this is what really stuck with people. And finally, we have economic dimension. And to me, there is a new stratification of workforce. We've seen that the entire labor market is now splitting on two broad groups, one that is able to work from home and the other that is unable to work from home. Obviously, those unable to work from home, they are pretty much struck by this crisis. If you're selling sandwiches in Pret-a-Manger, the best case that can happen to you, you go to furlough, at the end, you lose your job. We've seen that there is massive firing here in the UK. They call it a bloodshed of firing people. We've seen that this economic has brought digitalization, catalyst. So the companies now have to reinvent themselves. It's either digitalize your business or perish. We've seen also among economies that there is a strong need for diversification. The countries that are heavily dependent on tourism are struggling at the moment. And finally, we can see a new massive economic crisis coming on, and people have to brace themselves for what is going to come after this pandemic.
And we'll definitely get to that, I think, because I think that's one of the big questions which I certainly wanted to ask the panel with regards to that. Edita, I know that you've been working in Kosovo, and we were really intrigued by the research that you were conducting, particularly looking at the startup community and that type of thing, which of course is one of the big motors. I'd just be curious kind of to hear your thoughts with regards to what's been said so far, but also kind of what additional dimensions can your research explain with regards particularly to the academic dimension of what Mihailo just been speaking about?
Firstly, yes, in Kosovo there have been similar changes, especially in unemployment. There has been a huge many people that have been unemployed in the recent months. They have been downsizing. Our research supports this because the research we have conducted in April with 218 startups. It was focusing especially on identifying the needs of these startups and how they are coping with the situation of COVID-19. The research findings did indicate that startups are struggling a lot as a result of the situation caused by the COVID-19. Around 60% of these startups were really concerned about the economic situation due to the pandemic. 43% of them have experienced changes, and 30% expected to experience changes in the near future. According to these findings, startup businesses are struggling in Kosovo as a result of COVID-19.
I wanted to kind of, what you've all been saying is kind of strikes me according. We're painting a picture really of a continent in turmoil, so a continent which is facing significant impacts across the kind of the four dimensions Mihailo was talking about. I'd be curious as to whether you think that this is something which, do you find that Europeans have sufficient faith in, for example, the government in resolving some of these issues, or in our economic leaders in resolving the issue? Or do you find that the fact that there are these protests, which are becoming mass protests, is a sign and indication that there is still a huge social upheaval that we have to prepare for in Europe moving forward? I'd be curious, kind of, whether through your research or kind of what you're analyzing in terms of the sentiments, that we're getting some sense of that across the research.
To be honest, we didn't have protests in Kosovo. I mean, at least not in the outdoors. The government did take some measures. They did take measures in April and May. They had this financial package, emergent financial package, which was focused to help businesses, and they did support them with employee salaries. They did not pay the full price of the full salaries, but they did help them. They did pay 50% of the rent fee, and they did help them in other ways as well. I think one thing that was included was to delay the lease payments, the tax payments. So the government is taking now other steps to ensure economic growth. They are now focusing. The government did approve an action plan. It's the economic recovery plan, which includes also help to businesses as well as to people. They are focusing on improving the situation in regards by helping these improving employment. They will improve employment, especially to more marginalized groups of people. They will facilitate access to getting loans for private enterprises. The government has also approved a plan that will allow tax deferral and tax payment relief, and they have allocated, I think, 50 million euros for this. So there is progress, like the state of the businesses, because we have conducted another study for businesses in April as well. So 560 businesses took part in this research. So in general, the condition of the startups and businesses in Kosovo is not that good. But there are being steps. The government is acknowledging the issues, and they are taking steps to economic recovery.
Yeah.
I can try to answer your question, but I will have some piece of answer. I guess I don't have the full answer. So first thing, which is, as Mihailo precise, I do agree. I mean, we are I'm afraid we will face strong divisions between people in our countries. And I'm afraid that the crisis will increase these divisions. However, and I'm also afraid that we don't capture this very properly in our research because we are dealing with population which are usually not answering surveys. However, as far as I can tell, what we measured is a very strong support to, let's say, safety measures taken by the government. In Germany, it's for instance 80% of support, and even in France, where we don't usually trust our institutions as strongly as in Germany, we have something like almost 60% of support. And as Mihailo precise, we have, let's say, between 10 and 50% of people who do not agree to these measures from an ideological point of view, and that's it. So at least from the people point of view, from the citizens point of view, what the government is doing is correct overall. From my perspective, so another type of answer. What we captured is that there are two main expectations within the population in France, Germany, and the UK. One thing is about degrowth. We want more ecology, we want local thing, we want maybe more simplicity, etc. One thing. And another thing is about we want a more caring society. We want more support, we want more money for the health system, we want more money for the key workers. In a way, our priorities have been reassessed by the crisis. So these two dimensions are very left-oriented. And I'm not sure, at least in France, that the government decided to go into this direction. And so that's why I come back with by what I said at the beginning. I'm afraid that it will lead to further divisions in the company, but this is in the society, but this is my personal opinion.
I agree with Francois. I would just like to add one more thing. In April, when we conducted our nationally representative research in both UK and Italy, we found that the majority of people are supporting the government. And when we say government, we are talking about, the government. And then we also looked at different institutions such as National Health Service, police, army, etc., etc. And obviously the strongest support was for National Health Service, which is logical, because this is what's relevant during the crisis. Now, there is a Latin saying that says historia magistra vitae est, which means history is a teacher of life. And what we know that during the crisis like pandemics, which can be compared to a war, people will give their support to the government, and the government will have the back of the people. But as soon as the crisis is over, this dissatisfaction and frustration might go up to the surface. For example, we've seen this during the World War II, when, for example, the Prime Minister Winston Churchill had, unequivocal support by the people. As soon as the war ended, he lost his seat. He lost the elections. There were more recent examples in Europe. For example, in Serbia during the war in Yugoslavia, Milosevic had support, and at the end, as soon as the war ended, he lost. People went out on the street and he had to resign. So I'm just thinking, for now the support for the government is strong. I'm very anxious to see what is going to happen once the crisis is over. We are going to see some major changes across Europe.
Yeah, I think that's really, it segues quite nicely in terms of the next question I wanted to kind of bring to you, is with regards to so how can essentially European leaders, regardless of whether they're in business or in civil society and government, precisely react to this situation where we've had a life-changing event that's impacted the entire European continent. We know that there are still massive economic measures to be put in place to restore the economy, and that, whether the measures that are being proposed will be sufficient is a big question mark. We know that certain sectors still are completely offline and are going to be offline for the foreseeable future. What would you say in terms of the research should be things that governments, businesses, even or people themselves should be privileging kind of in the coming months? And I think François already highlighted some of the points, the degrowth element, those types of things that are still very prominent in the discourse. Also, I mean, the social tensions in certain countries, inspired by Black Lives Matter, but I think also have a European undertone as well to it. I'd just be curious, kind of how you all think about that. François, do you want to maybe start us off, and then we'll give the floor to Edita?
In regards to the study that we conducted, 79% of startups did select financial packages, the first option when asked about what assistance would be most beneficial that would be provided by the government. And the second most selected option was tax relief, followed with 42.20%, and fiscal relief with 31.90%. Moreover, when asked regarding most needed assistance from organizations that supported startups, 63.76% chose monetary help for employee salaries, and 50% chose to cover their fixed costs. In addition to this, it is important to point out that in terms of businesses, somewhat 71% of them considered that one of the measures that the government should undertake in order to help businesses was the full compensation of fixed costs, for example, rent. As such, this would somewhat help businesses to ease their way to survive in the market. So, hence, based on these findings, leaders, organizations, and the government could offer support regarding to these specific needs in order to mitigate startup and business failure.
Yeah, so it's really continuing that direct financial support and boosting it as much as possible as kind of one of the key factors to kickstart the economy again. François,
Yeah.
in terms of the analysis on your side, does that gel with what people are expecting, or would you say there's also other dimensions that they should be thinking about as kind of the leadership, so to speak?
From my perspective, what has been one interesting dimension of the lockdown has been that people had time to think of the way they live, or they lived, actually. And for instance, the debate about the key workers has been very interesting, because once again, it reassessed the priorities in life or in societies. And I guess topics like, it's this crisis at least stated clearly that, for instance, health is priceless, freedom is priceless. And I guess it will change the way people think of their own life in the future. I pretty think I would bet for it. So it is once again a partial answer. I don't have the full answer. One other thing that I can say about your question, Kim, is from a business point of view. For instance, we saw some companies who supported, let's say, who tried to help, let's say, the healthcare system by making some ventilators out of Google's, or making some alcoholic gel for free, and so on. It was very interesting to see that these initiatives has been strongly supported by people, even if they knew that it was marketing. But it's a new way of marketing. We want company involved in the society. And this is also something that I think could be a trend over the long run.
So it's really this idea of brand activism. So as we saw during the Black Lives Matter, brands also, blacked out their social media profiles and that type of thing. But it's interesting that you say that there's also a keen awareness that it is marketing for marketing's sake, but at the same time, it has a benefit. Mihailo, in UK feeling the same way, at least also, or kind of what's your answer to this question?
So my insight into this question is that this downturn of economic activity actually enabled space for companies to engage in blue sky thinking, as smart companies who really wanted to take the best out of this crisis and this quiet time. They focused on innovation and reinventing itself. Let me just remind you one thing. During the Great Recession in 2008, these are the companies that have started. WhatsApp, Groupon, Instagram, Uber, Pinterest, Slack, Dropbox. You see all these major companies that have really profoundly changed the way how we go about certain things, the way how we commute, or the way how we post about ourselves, or the way how we communicate in business, have emerged during the crisis. And I think this is an opportunity. Currently in the EU and the UK, there is abundance of grants to the corporate sector, especially supporting the innovative activities. So the companies have to stay vigilant and look what's the lifeline support for the companies that are trying to innovate. For example, our own company, during this quiet time, we have come up with a very innovative idea, and we are now starting a new tech spin-off. We got the support from investor. We got like $1 million funds to implement our idea, which is the AI-driven research design, which is quite innovative. So we as a company took this to our advantage. And finally, when it comes to government, they are playing a pivotal role in here. The government has to provide palpable support. Okay, words are not enough in here. Like, you have to give some, tax reliefs, support for the workers. We've seen that there was a massive support in the UK in terms of furlough. The government said all the furloughed workers earning up to £2,500 will be financed from the government. We've seen, for example, recently that the government is trying to support a hospitality sector that is struggling by having incentives for people dining out from Monday to Wednesday. For example, everyone who is going to a restaurant or a pub, they have £10 taken off their bill, to help hospitality industry. This activity is called Eat Out to Help Out. And finally, I would say, humans are central here, people are central here. And I think that the governments really need to think about how to provide psychological support to people. Because people are fragile, and as Francois says, this is going to leave massive psychological scars. So I think a psychological support and counseling support will play a big role in the months to come.
It's really interesting that I mentioned that I hadn't appreciated, and I think you're right to also recall that this is still about people, and that people are the ones which are most affected by what's happening. It enables me to open a new door, in essence, to talk a little bit about kind of beyond COVID-19 as well. Kind of, are there, from your research that you've undertaken, and whether it be just one specific particular COVID-19, but beyond, are there also kind of any new kind of emerging themes, specifically European themes, that you think are particularly poignant for us to be thinking about or to be anticipating? So I'm thinking of things like, in the EU, we had for a while, there was a huge fear that the extreme right parties, separatist movements were gaining a huge amount of ground. Has that stopped as a result of the COVID-19? Are we looking at something different? I think also the fear that Europe was falling behind China and the US economically as well. Are those kinds of themes still things that you think are worrying Europeans or driving European approaches? Or do you think, actually, no, like Francois is highlighting, there's been a change in priorities, and are there specifically European priorities in that list?
So
sorry, this question
some elements. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Francois. Sorry.
Go on, Mino.
No, you started. Sorry.
Go ahead, Francois.
Two things which are related to this, which are specific to Europe. One thing was, okay, did European Union succeed in its fight against COVID-19? What did people think about that? So here the results are mixed. We have 34% of people who consider that European Union has been a big fail during the crisis. So which is, I don't know how to interpret that. So this is the raw result. You do it, you can interpret the way you want. One other thing, which is, well, here I have an interpretation. It is about borders. So it was during lockdown, we have been told that it was safer to stay behind our wall. And I was a bit afraid that it could lead some of us to think that borders would protect us from bad things. It does not seem to be the case. So as Mihailo said about Russia, and so people they usually do not want to reestablish borders between Europe. So Europe maybe not stronger after the crisis, but at least from a citizen point of view, European is still a very strong idea for citizens.
Edita, from Kosovo, which is outside the EU, does that also resonate, you think, in Kosovo, or do you think there's also different emerging themes there which you would say is interesting for us to be mindful of?
Yes, I mean, I'm still going back to the studies that we conducted. 75% of startups, which is 3 out of 4 startups, were unable to keep employees in the payroll. On the other side, 37% of the businesses have reported at the time of the study that was conducted that it is very likely that their business will bankrupt. Even though we have to remember that this research is conducted in April, and maybe there have been changes since then. In general, these findings indicate that these startups and businesses have suffered significant loss, and it's uncertain how they will be coping with this situation in the future.
Yeah, and do you think, I mean, I know that, for example, the airline industry, they're talking about years before there's a full recovery. Do you think that's also something which is going to probably happen? So, like, will the government measures that are being proposed now, do you think this is something that's going to have to be maintained for years on end?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there is in Kosovo now, the situation is getting better. We are having less than 100. Yesterday we had less than 100 cases, which is a success. Considering the previous days, the situation was it was considerably more serious. So it's a good thing that the cases are dropping and people are respecting the laws and so on.
Yeah. And Mihailo, I think I'd be really interested because I know that you are dealing with 2 very different situations. The countries are in very different places in the world, in their place in the world as well. How is that translating there in terms of emerging themes? Are there things which are common to both of them, or are they very different, the emerging themes between the two, between Italy and the UK?
So, Kim, to be frank with you, Italy and the UK have so much in common, even though UK is in the north and Italy is in the south. And I would say, to me, there are 2 very salient themes coming out of this. One, it's in the line of Francois has said, there is a sentiment shift in terms of, political perception of the world around us and who are the friends. So that is a red flag. And second thing that I would really like to explore is what people really think is acceptable measure during this crisis. And what we found out is that the data privacy, is becoming more prominent and more important. We ask people what kind of measures they think are acceptable by the governments. And in both UK and Italy, the least acceptable measure is the government monitoring the private data of the citizens. The demographics who are particularly vocal about this are mostly women and younger people. So this crisis has brought up on the surface the importance of the privacy of people and protection of their data. So to me, that is a very interesting thing. People would prefer to be locked in the house 3 times more often than having someone looking into their private data. So this is a very important learning lesson, coming out of this exercise that we did in UK and Italy.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you're talking about that. Of course, we're dealing a lot with data protection and privacy within SMR, and we're going to be interviewing at the Insights Festival show with Dr. Jelinek, who's the chairwoman of the European Data Protection Board, where we'll be talking a little bit about things like contact tracing apps and those types of things. But it's really, thank you for bringing that up. We are almost short of time, unfortunately. I wish we'd have even more time to talk to you all about kind of all these different facets, because I think there's so much that we're opening. And I wish we could spend a lot of time on kind of digging into the details of it, but unfortunately, time runs. I kind of wanted to allow you guys kind of a final thought and to kind of ask you, what would you say is actually the future outlook for Europe? Kind of if we're looking 6 months down the line, a year, the crystal ball. We know that the crystal ball will change a lot because of what we've discovered in 2020, that everything we would planned at the beginning of the year completely didn't pan out. But what would you say is the future outlook based on your research, based on what you're hearing, based on what you're conducting, if you're allowing us to have a sneak glimpse into work that you're undertaking? What is that future outlook? And what would you say are things for us to think about? Mihailo, do you want us to get us started?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I said, Europe is a small but resilient continent with a long history. I think there are 3 things that could, be a light of beacon in the future. And it is that, we need to focus on humanity. No one should be left behind. This crisis is an opportunity for a new renaissance in Europe. Second thing is solidarity. We are all interdependent. What happens is in China is affecting people in Iceland, in Italy, in Sweden, in Peru. So we really have to really look beyond our own borders. And finally, I would say the most important point is sustainability. We can't live anymore like this. The companies can't live on this assumption that you can always take from the environment. What caused this entire crisis, this pandemic, is companies relentlessly claiming the habitat space of animals, and at the end, we interact with wildlife, and those viruses on the wildlife pass on to human, and we don't have any defense mechanism to fight this. We don't have immune system to fight these viruses off. So we don't need a science fiction novel saying the Martians came in and brought new virus. We have this on our own planet, so we really have to think how we deal with the environment and how we treat the nature around us, because the environment is most important. And just to finish one thing to really illustrate how environment is important. So think about counting your money and keeping your breath. You will not be able to count your money for a long time if you can't breathe. So environment is everything.
Thanks, Mihailo. Edita, do you want to give us a few final words?
Yes, so I wanted to share good news. Like in Kosovo, there has been a record of remittances that Kosovars have accepted from family outside and stuff. I know it. I don't know exactly the exact amount, but I know it was a really huge amount of money. The government has stated before that are implementing this economic growth plan is planning, I think, 365 million euros they are investing in this. So maybe there will be also. I just wanted to go back to Mihailo and to the thing he said about the psychological support. In Kosovo, there is a free line, like for people to talk and to call healthcare professionals, like to communicate about their issues and related COVID-related anxieties. So there is being a lot done in Kosovo. There is a real big support to Kosovars right now. So I want to be optimistic and just say that their things are going good. Another thing is that the government has decided to vaccinate and to immunize people from the seasonal flu, so that there like the chances of getting the virus and the flu at the same time will be like lower, will not at all exist. So it's a good thing that the government and the Kosovars are recovering to some extent from all this impact that COVID has had on us, because it's in Kosovo the situation was the virus went. It had a huge impact on our lives. We had 2 months lockdown in March until May.
François, in terms of final words, in terms of the final outlook, the final outlook, the future outlook of Europe.
So I do share entirely what my colleague just said. I think, of course, ecology is a very major issue, divisions within the population and major issue, and the way we are dealing with the economic crisis is, of course, a major issue. One addition to this is I think we have to learn how to deal with uncertainty. The main issue is that we are living in a situation which is very uncertain, which has a strong impact on business because we don't know what the future will be made of. It has also, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the disease per se. So we don't know exactly what we are dealing with and so on. So I think what would be very useful for us would be to change our attitude towards uncertainty. And I hope we will learn in the next few months how to deal with this.
Edita, Mihailo, Francois, I just want to, on behalf of the viewers, thank you so much for contributing your expertise and your thoughts and the results and the findings of your research. I think it's been an exciting and interesting journey in terms of the state of the world from a European perspective. And I just thank you very much for opening so many doors for us. I hope that you've all enjoyed watching the show. We will be, of course, stopping in other regions, so definitely stay tuned for more of the state of the world according to Insights. For those of you who are watching, let's be aware that the Insights Festival is taking place from the 14th to the 17th of September. You can still register on the smo.org website to get access to even more insights from research experts like Edita, Francois, and Mihailo. There's lots of information to learn about the world and the state of our world, how we're dealing with COVID-19 and how we're preparing for the post-COVID-19 world. Edita, Francois, Mihailo, thank you again for your time and your contributions.
Thank you very much.
And one more word of thanks, of course, to our sponsor, NetQuest, who's made this possible for us. And we hope to see you again in one of the upcoming shows. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Welcome back to the Insights Festival Show studio. In about 12 minutes, we're going to be having a presentation from introducing the Insights Festival community. Bianca and Steliana are back, and they're going to be introducing us to some of the YES members, as well as some of the client research users. So I think it's going to be a really interesting session to understand kind of who are the ones which are, preparing and using research to inform decision making, and on the other side, who are the future insights makers. So looking very much forward to that session. I hope you are as well. Take a moment to grab a glass of water, get a little break, and come back so that you can experience what Bianca and Steliana have uncovered. See you soon.